and the cost that it's raised on constructing a new facility means that the overall cost could float up to 30%, and most companies just can't handle that. What I'm now seeing is it hits small businesses that may bring in materials from China but then employ Americans to put that product together. And small businesses are starting to lay people off. And when a small business lays somebody off, they likely go to church with them, or their kids play on a soccer team together. It's the last thing they want to do. But this is entirely because of Donald Trump's tariffs. He has owned tariffs, and he's going to own the impacts and the devastating impacts of them on our economy.
Governor, I want to switch tacks a little bit and talk about the federal response and state response to disasters when they hit your area. I know that Kentucky dealt with a horrible flood back in July 2022, and the aftermath was a lot of political contention, and Republicans said there was corruption, but an audit cleared your administration of all that. And then cut to this year, there was another bad flood disaster, and the aftermath doesn't seem to have been quite as acrimonious. Maybe the disaster wasn't as bad. What are your lessons learned for dealing with these natural disasters and politically charged moments, especially when we see what's happening in Texas right now in the aftermath of their disastrous flooding too?
We've had 14 federally declared disasters since I've been governor. We've been hammered. We lost 80 plus people to our worst tornado, 45 people to our worst flooding. We have been hit over and over and over again, and the way you respond has to be apolitical. You push it all out, and you do everything you can to help your people. You put them first. You put them first in the search and rescue. You put them first in the intermediate housing, and you never stop working to get them back on their feet. We are still building housing from the 2021 tornadoes, and we are not going to stop until everyone has that home, because the last family that's helped is just as important as the first family that's helped. And our state auditor can launch an investigation that ends up showing that we have one of the best run funds in the nation. It's not going to stop me from doing everything I can to help my people. And that's what's so sad about a special session in Texas that's about helping people after a flood that killed over 100 people. So many parents, their daughters didn't come home from camp. And I can't imagine being a parent myself living through that. And now a special session that's supposed to be about them and those families has become purely political. It's wrong on so many levels.
Governor, stay with us. We have lots more to talk about, including what the road ahead looks like for Democrats. And still to come, how Trump's efforts to control messaging mirrors authoritarian tactics. You're watching The Weekend Primetime.
When it comes to seeing catastrophes continue to ravage all 7 continents again and again and again. We're seeing things today such as the scientists and the meteorologists could not even begin to think of pre-COVID. Since 2018, basically everything has went sour in every aspect that you can think of. And of course, COVID was the big deal that basically knocked a lot of people off their feet. Fortunately, we had a strong enough government to be able to pull our bootstraps up and go on with our lives, or at least we thought that we did. But as we're trying to get back to that same velocity that we had before, we're having to deal now with all these continuous forces of nature that's lashing out at the inhabitants is here up on the planet, that's making it that much tougher to be able to regain another foothold. And I've been looking at this and looking at this and looking at this ever since basically the flooding happened in Waverly, Tennessee, in Humphreys County. I think it was in 2019, or it may have been 2018. There's just been an endless amount of disasters that has hit various states, and if it wasn't flooding, it was fires. If it wasn't fires, it was something else. I mean, you can go into some of these cities and some of these areas, and it almost looks like a zombie show pertaining to the people that is taking drugs, that their minds and their bodies is completely messed up to the degree that they're basically dysfunctional. Some of them can't even think for themselves. It's awful in what we're seeing. And of course, every time that a catastrophe hits, and I've mentioned this before, all it does is put a strain on the local resources. And if you get enough bangs, if you get enough hits, eventually it's not just going to affect your local economy, but it's going to affect your national economies. If you'll add that on top of Donald Trump being a climate denier, Donald Trump doing what he's doing right now with the tariffs, you have a formula of a disaster. You are basically producing a perfect storm to the degree that if we're not in a depression yet, it's just a matter of time before we will, towards people struggling and not being able to keep the lights on. Now that's pretty bad whenever that's done by man-made.
Their political party. This according to the latest AP NORC poll, which asked respondents to share the first word or phrase that came to mind when they think of their political party. Now, overall, roughly 1/3 of Democrats describe their party negatively. 14% describe it as weak or tepid, and 9% say it is broken or ineffective. Back with us is Democratic Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky. Governor, what's your reaction to this poll? Do you see this as a troubling sign for Democrats?
What I think you see is the polling on the Democratic brand in general has results like that, but our candidates are polling really well. You look at Abigail Spanberger and the great race she's running in Virginia. You look at Mikey Sherrill and the great race she's running in New Jersey. Both proud Democrats, members or former members of Congress that are doing and polling really well in those areas. In many ways, it's like when you poll public education. People will say, oh, public education in America isn't great, but then you ask them about their own public school and they like it. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take affirmative steps to re-earn the faith of the American people. And during the last presidential election, we were cast as distracted, not focused on the everyday issues that matter most to people. So what I think we've got to do is spend 80% of our time both talking about and working on people's core concerns. And that's your job. And whether you make enough to support your family, it's your next doctor's appointment for yourself, your parents, or your kids. It's the roads and bridges you drive every day, the school you drop your kids off at, and whether you feel safe in your community. Donald Trump in many ways promised to focus on those things, to bring down costs. He promised not to cut Medicaid, but look at what he's done. So the path is there, it's wide open, and I think Democrats can re-earn the faith of the American people quickly, but we've got to be disciplined and we've got to get results.
Governor, I'd like to ask you about another recent set of polling, this on the war in Israel and Gaza. New Gallup polling finding that only 8% of Democrats support the Israeli army's current military campaign there, and many are turning on Netanyahu or have soured even further on Netanyahu. It is shaping up to potentially be a wedge issue for Democrats in the coming elections. So I want to know if you would support ending aid to Israel until the starvation ends, and if you think the party is eventually going to come closer to their voters on these matters.
Well, I think it's important to recognize that Israel has been a long-term important ally of the United States, and their security reflects on ours. But you can believe that and still not want children starving in Gaza. I think there's lots of ways for allies, not necessarily publicly, to discuss these issues, to bring different pressure to get the best result. And I certainly hope our United States government is doing everything.
But what if your voters want you to do more publicly? They want you to have those conversations publicly.
I believe that our national security is tied to Israel, but that doesn't mean that we can't get food help to these children. Children in America shouldn't be starving. They shouldn't be starving in Gaza. We are all children of God, and getting those kids the aid they need is really important.
Governor, just to follow up a little bit, this is really cutting across bipartisan lines these days. You have your own Congressman Thomas Massey has been outspoken about funding to Israel and when this famine is occurring. And do you think that it is immoral for the United States taxpayer to continue funding unfettered, unchecked while this famine is occurring?
Well, I think it's important when you have allies that you don't necessarily argue in public, but that doesn't mean that you can't put significant pressure. These videos, these photographs are more than just videos and photographs. They're a reality of people who are going through the worst of the worst conditions. I certainly hope that the president, but all of Congress as well, is putting the type of pressure that will ultimately alleviate this situation. That doesn't mean we leave Israel without the means to defend itself, but both should be able to be possible in this situation. We should say we can have an Israel that defends itself while at the same time children not starving in Gaza.
Governor Beshear, Molly Johnfast here. I want to talk to you about Medicaid. So slipped in the BBB is this Medicaid, this skinny Medicaid repeal. And what it means is they're taking funds away from states that have done Medicaid expansion. That will mean closing rural hospitals. That will mean your people unable, you'll have these hospital deserts. You'll have places where people cannot get treatment. Tell us, what can you do as a governor of a red state to try and sort of save these hospitals and save any kind of medical care for your people?
I'm going to do my best, but no governor and no state has the ability or the budget to make up for the trillions of dollars of cuts that's coming to Medicaid and the difficulty, the red tape, the extra paperwork that's being thrown on our people with the Republicans in Congress hoping they won't check a box and somebody who really needs health care coverage will lose it. I think it's immoral. In the Bible, Jesus says a doctor is for the sick, yet the sick are not going to be able to see that doctor. And in Kentucky alone, they estimate 200,000 Kentuckians are going to lose their health care coverage. 20,000 health care workers are going to get fired, are going to lose their job, and up to 35 rural hospitals may close. And can you imagine the services that are going to be cut first are the ones where the margins are the smallest? For instance, delivery. A Kentuckian or a rural American that's looking at having to drive 2 hours just to deliver their baby, what's that going to do to a family? What does it mean when the due date is getting close? Are families separated in that last period of time? Is she staying in a hotel? The same about your treatment for cancer or seeing a cardiologist. I mean, we should want to have specialties in all these communities. And the final point is you are taking a ton of money out of these communities. You close that rural hospital and those folks aren't going to the local restaurant. They're not going to the local coffee shop. They're not going to the local bank. This is going to devastate the economies of rural America. And the only true answer is to rescind this bill. And that means flipping Congress. It means making sure we have a lot more Democratic governors that will stand up and speak out. It means showing the American people exactly how bad it's going to be.
Governor Andy Beshear, we thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, the Voting Rights Act is turning 60, but instead of celebration, there's growing concern. The Reverend Al Sharpton joins us next.
I want to say something about what you're talking about, Mr. Beshear's. Not only is it going to affect families that way, but it's going to affect state workers pertaining to those that fix potholes, those that cut the size of your ditches in your rural country areas. It's going to affect every aspect of the pleasures that we take for granted today, that we really don't realize what's being done and how it's being done to make our lives more comfortable. It's going to affect all that. Plus, it's going to affect scientists It's going to affect meteorologists as far as being able to predict better analysis of storms and etc. It's going to affect the medical industry pertaining to science, not having the flexibility to be able to experiment and find various cures that's out there. The whole thing, what the governor's talking about is going to be knocked completely out of focus. And whenever you do this, you are asking for a recession that could lead into a depression, a major depression. 1929, they had a depression. People lost their shirts. People was jumping out of buildings. People could not maintain because basically people made a run for the money, and there wasn't nothing to insure or back the dollar bill at that time. And basically the banks went dry. Well, whenever the banks went dry, it also dried up a lot of other things. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about monumental effects in a negative way. Now, you know, it talks about in the Bible, because Mr. Bashir, he mentioned this, it talks about in the Bible pertaining to blaspheming, the blaspheming laws. There's actually only one law throughout God's history and God's history book that announces or pronounces that there is an unforgivable, unpardonable sin, which is what? Which is blasphemy. What exactly is blasphemy? Blasphemy is basically being in total denial that there is a God, number one. And blasphemy can also be a fraudulent imposter that pretends that they really have a relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ, but in reality, they actually do not. Now, some of the work that I put out had a bunch of cowboys and etc., and one cowgirl in it called the Open Range. Well, I tend to wonder in what is going on today if it's open season pertaining to your mama papa businesses here in America that really don't have no other choices to survive other than to pass it down to the consumer. Whenever you do that enough, as I have emphasized upon before in some of my other work pertaining to an ecosystem, kind of like looking into an ocean and you see the big fish that eats the littler fish. But then again, you got a fish that's bigger than the big fish that eats even that fish. And then you keep on and on and on till you wind up with a whale or a shark or a whale to the biggest of the biggest. Well, it's the same differences out here in the market world pertaining to various economies, because eventually, if enough of the smaller people, enough of the poor people that they call the third class citizens, if enough of them fail, it's going to affect tremendously on the second class citizens, and eventually, if enough of those citizens plummet, it will affect the first class citizens, which is people like the Walton family and other well-to-do people in the country. So what we're talking about here is a calamity of a storm cloud that is brewing, and if people aren't smart enough to identify the dangers ahead, then basically we're going to run a mist off into a darkened area that will be unlike any other time in history, other than maybe pointing our finger at the Great Depression or pointing our finger at possibly the First World War or the Second World War, because during that time, whenever something like that occurs, everything at that point in time gets devoted to the military and the first responders. And basically you're talking about not only price hiking, but now you're talking about shortages that will lead eventually into mandated restrictions on just exactly how much gas that you can get, how much groceries that you can get, how many tires that you can get, and et cetera, et cetera. In other words, the the belt will become even tighter to the degree that the first people that it affects is usually the people on the bottom. Well, that's what we're starting to see right now pertaining to the tariffs. We're starting to see it having basically an opposite effect upon to that in which what Donald J. Trump claimed or proclaimed that he was going to do for the American people. Like I said, what he's actually doing is opening up a venue, basically on open season, on the citizens towards these businesses taking advantage of the consumer, and it whenever you go in to buy something, like the other day, I went into a lawnmower place in Union City. I'm not going to mention the name, but it's a fairly known lawnmower place, and I realized that the lawnmower industry, basically has to make their money in the summer months, because during the winter months you don't have grass growing and you're not selling near as many mowers. As a matter of fact, Mr. Harrison, that I know very well, that I live right beside in Milan, Tennessee, that sells mowers, especially those that, like I purchased not too long ago, a used mower pertaining to the X-Mark mower. He has recently told me, in less than 2 weeks ago, that his business has been so overflowing that they couldn't keep up with the demand. They could not keep up with the demand, and already they have compassed a mower per day, a brand new mower per day being sold out of his business. Well, naturally, whenever God blesses the country like it has over here in Northwest Tennessee, I don't know how it's like in Nebraska or Florida or other parts of the country, because I don't keep up with it that closely, but around here we've basically had a surplus of rain. It's a good thing, I think, to have a surplus of rain, but there's also a downside to it, which is it makes it hard on people that has big yards towards people with mowers. And of course, whenever you have rain, and your grass grows, naturally you're going to have a tremendous business in either selling lawnmower parts or selling brand new mowers. So basically what I was listening to was an individual that in a way was almost complaining because of the money that he had made this year, because of God blessing this particular area and seeing so much rain. Well, my opinion about the rain is I'm glad that it's rained almost every other day or every 3 days, even though it's made it tough on me, pretending to be mowing my yard out here, because you don't have to be a brain surgeon to look around pertaining to the farming industry, the agriculture industry, where you see a irrigation system just about every other mile or every other 5 miles. You see an irrigation big system sitting there just ready to be hooked up and start dragging the water out of the aqueducts below our feet, pretending to where we get our water. And eventually, if you hook up enough of them, pumping enough water out of the aqueduct system out in the grounds, you're not going to have enough water for the rest of the people pertaining to their wells drying up. Now, do you think that the farming agriculture industry is going to make up the differences if people's well starts going dry and we have to bring in a well team? And I think it's after 75 foot they start charging more per foot, and then after they exceed 100 foot they charge even more per foot, because it requires more equipment, it requires more horsepower, it requires everything. I mean, everything basically doubles or triples as they got to go down deeper and deeper and deeper just to be able to hit water. Well, in the meantime, you're going to have people that's starving to death with water, so then we'll have to rely upon the government to bring in water supply like they did in Michigan in places. So one disaster can formulate into another disaster. But the point that I'm trying to make pertaining to a lawnmower, I went in there to buy a regular filter. Of course, it's an open 2-valve hydraulic filter that's open both ways. But whenever and it looks identically to a regular filter that goes on a car. I mean, identically. After it was all said and done with, They wanted $55 for a filter. And I looked at them and I said, you got to be kidding me. Because you know good and well, if Mr. Harrison's lawnmower industry business in Milan, Tennessee has done extraordinarily well, I'm pretty sure the ones in Union City, the ones in Martin, the ones in Dyersburg, the ones in Jackson, the ones in the surrounding areas has done very well too as well. So how come they got a nitpick to their customer base in basically charging probably about 300%, maybe 500% on a filter that they may have $8, $10, $12 in, and now they want to gain the price in making 500% more than what they've invested? Why would they want to do that to their customer base? To me, that's nickeling and diming them to death. And that's exactly what other retailers out there are doing. They're nickeling and diming the consumer to death. And of course, your bigger retail places like Walmart, Walgreens, and other big retail places like that, they're big enough and strong enough that they can eat it to some degree, but eventually they're going to have to start passing down the prices too. And you can see that by going into the food market aisles and start purchasing groceries in Walmart, not counting what you see other items that used to be for this price and now is no longer for that price. But the point that I'm trying to make is this: on your mama papa businesses, they really got to stay on top of their game pertaining to the marketing strategies, because they know that if they sell that particular product for this amount of money, it's going to cost X amount of money to order 4 more just like it to put it on the shelf so they can sell those 4. So they're constantly having to look at supply chain issues. They're constantly having to look at supply chain hikes. They're constantly having to look at other things that's going to, once more, trickle down to the consumer. Trickle down to the consumer. And to me, it's almost reached a level of blaspheming against their own people pertaining to what Donald Trump right now is basically doing. And I would want to read the scripture that my friend sent me the other day pertaining to Proverbs chapter 6 verse 19. It describes 2 actions that God finds progressively offensive in false witness who speaks lies, and someone who sows discord among brethren. This is part of the passage in Proverbs 6, 16 through 19, basically, that discusses these things that God Himself actually hates. Now, whenever the so-called Christians come at you and they'll try to explain to you, well, you're not supposed to have no hate in your heart. You're not supposed to have no hate in your heart because a true Christian don't have no hate in their heart. I got news for you. A true Christian is supposed to have the same type of hate in their heart as the Heavenly Father has pertaining to people that's doing these things to us. Just like we're supposed to hate the sinner that does the sinning, but we're supposed to love the sinner if the sinner is willing to come back to the altar in displaying their actions towards being remorseful and that in which what they have done. In other words, we do love the sinner if that sinner is willing to come and acknowledge their sins. But if that sinner ain't willing to do that, we're still caring for the sinner, but we don't love what the sinner is doing. That is absolutely a lie to the very pits of hell and back regarding people supposed to love everything because we're born again Christians. Just like it talks about in the first 3 chapters of Revelations, it talks about the 7 churches, that God hates those that profess to be Jews and are not, because they're connivers, they're manipulators, they're They're not looking for bargains. They're looking for steals. They're not looking for deals. They're looking for steals. And those will be the very people that will talk you completely out of your shirt and laugh as they're filling their pockets up going to the bank. God hates those people, just like God hates those that basically worship Balak in the first part of Revelations, pertaining to those that are true blue 100% hypocrites. And they know that they're hypocrites. They know that their ideology is wrong. They know that they're out here spewing out lies and discord among the brethrens, but they continue to do it anyway. Now you're reaching in the areas of blasphemy, and blasphemy, according to the Bible, is an unforgivable sin. Now, I don't know exactly where the line begins and ends pertaining to what is acceptable with God and what isn't acceptable with God, because to me, in my eyes, in mankind's eyes, the sin of doing bodily harm either to a child or to an elderly person that can't defend themselves is basically the top of all sins of an individual that does this, especially if they're doing it intentionally to bring harm and hurt into people's lives this way. But according to the Bible, all sins are equal, regardless whether it's stealing, lying, committing adultery, being disobedient to parents, killing. All sins are equal other than the sin of blasphemy. False witness who speaks lies, according to the Bible. This refers to someone who intentionally, consciously gives false testimony. That's exactly the things that I was accused of by my fellow brethren here in Northwest Tennessee by, I know, well over 50 different churches that wanted to bash and discriminate and dehumanize and demonize me because of my testimony pertaining to the things that God has brought me through. Why would I, or what would I get out of being basically an outcast by telling the truth pertaining to the things that God has brought me through and what God has showed me to be able to show others? What good am I going to get out of it pertaining to the seeds that I'm sowing today? Hopefully I'll be able to reap the reward from those seeds one day in the hereafter life. That's what I'm saying. The very people that was accusing me of discord, the very people that was telling me that I was sowing seeds of discord and basically bringing division among the churches and among the brothers, was they themselves that was doing this, because they was still in a state of denial similar towards the environmental global warming deniers. Whenever you have people that are so dead set that they're going to look at you in a negative form, in a negative image, I guarantee you could do whatever that you thought that you could do to that person in getting them to like you or to look at you in a positive way. You could do tripwire dances, you could do somersaults and cartwheels, you could do magical tricks or even tricks in a circus towards bringing laughter or pleasure into their lives. But I guarantee at the end of the day, after you get through talking until you're black and blue in the face, you're still not going to convince that person that you mean well and that your intentions are good pertaining to what you're trying to accomplish. I have seen that by being rejected again and again and again by my fellow supposedly brothers and sisters in the Lord. Because of why? Because of the yellow streak that come up and down their backs in looking at the book of Revelations and saying, well, that's too deep. or that's too strong, or that's too of this, or that's too of that. Well, I got news for these people that say that. In a way, it is deep. In a way, it is strong, pertaining to the book of Revelations in correspondence with the book of Daniel. But you know what? I didn't write the book of Daniel. I didn't sit down and write the book of Revelations. Just like I didn't write the other Gospels. Just like I didn't have nothing to do with the Bible. All I am is the messenger to the Bible. And if they're offended, they're not offended in Dennis James Jackson, also known as Elder Brother Juby, but they're actually offended in that in which what I'm teaching. It lined up with the same type of correspondence whenever Jesus was walking and talking among us. Because in actuality, they should have been praising Jesus. They should have been complimenting Jesus. They should have been patting Jesus on the back because he was feeding the hungry. He was healing blind eyes. He was causing old people to get up and walk. He was raising the dead. He was turning water into wine. He was doing all these miracles. So, politically speaking, they should have been praising Jesus Christ. So what was so offensive in that in which what Jesus Christ was doing, knowing that he was doing good? I don't think there's nobody that can deny that by you raising the dead, healing the sick, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, that those things are good. So what was so offensive? It was what Christ was teaching, because they had already become so indoctrinated by the old Mosaic law that Moses brought into effect of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that they just thought that this was absolutely crazy. How in the world can you love your enemy? How in the world can you turn thy cheek and offer thy other? How in the world can you praise God whenever everything around you is crumbling and going to pieces? Not only did they choose not to understand it, but they had made up their minds that they wasn't going to have it. And because of it, that was whenever Christ's own people started screaming and hollering to the political leader the day of the court, by away with him, away with him. We don't want to have nothing to do with this man. Away with him. Because they wasn't willing to what? Evolve. Grow. They wasn't willing to moderate. They wasn't willing to accept the facts of the facts being the facts. Now, today, 2,000 years later, I'm preaching the things that's coming out of the King James Version Bible, but yet now I'm still being ridiculed. I'm being persecuted. I'm being rejected. I'm being denied. I'm being made fun of. I got people that's demonizing me and dehumanizing me, and this has been going on now for the past 30 plus years. But yet now, it was the Holy Spirit working through God the Father and the Son, Jesus Christ, that took my testimony of 9 cassette tapes that's sent to the White House in 1988 during Ronald Reagan's administration, that helped to accomplish the Atlantic and the Pacific alliances pertaining to the ending of the Cold War. How can a group of people turn on somebody though they haven't done nothing personally to them? I've never beat them on a car deal. I haven't got fresh with any of their girlfriends or their wives or their daughters. I haven't went out here and tried to take any of their property from them. So why are they so offended in me? Even though the things that I'm teaching and preaching is actually in the letters of red in the King James Version Bible. I'm going to tell you why. Because they was bamboozled. They was deceived. They had bought into a lie pertaining to something that now they're going to have to back up and eat crow over, and rather than eat crow, they rather just still be in denial. Kind of like Donald Trump with basically your climate deniers, and he's one of the biggest ones towards being one of the climate deniers. you got people out there that have said, oh no, climate changing isn't real. Oh no, global warming isn't real. Oh no, environmental disasters isn't real. But yet now you see the signs in front of you, and you still don't see a movement in the opposite direction towards trying to correct the problem. Now, there was a movement in the Democrat Party while Biden was in power, and I, give 2 thumbs up pertaining to what he was trying to achieve pertaining to the Green New Deal. But whenever this man here got on stage, that ended it. It was all over. Well, as you continue to hear the governor talk about these natural catastrophes, these disasters that are continuously getting worse and worse and worse, and then if you'll top that off with what Donald J. Trump is actually doing with the tariffs, now, once more, you have an atmosphere of total disaster approaching us, and instead of getting away from the eye of the storm, in actuality, we're actually moving further closer to it. Why are they doing this is beyond me. This is one of the main reasons why that I myself didn't want to participate in this particular presidential election, because I could foresee what they was going to try to do. And it could all be eliminated if they just done the proper and right things by starting all over again. The way that they're doing it, they're going to make it 1,000 times harder on the third and the second class, while the first class stays in power a little bit longer before they actually go under, but eventually they'll go under too. So what he's doing by prolonging this travesty that's happened to us, he's actually causing it to be a worse of a catastrophe from a political perspective than it would have been if you'd have just done a clean sweep, kind of like taking a business and all of a sudden you're going to change the name, you're going to declare bankruptcy, you're going to take basically every employee and get them off the floor and start all over again. Or kind of like the little farmer that planted the crop and only about a third of it come up, and then he decided, well, I'm going to disc it all under and I'm going to try to replant. Well, I've seen some farmers recently, a matter of fact, I'm not going to mention no names, that has dry spots in different areas, and they'll go in there with the tractor and they'll disc up that dry spot and they'll replant the areas that didn't come up. That way they don't disturb the areas that did come up. Well, to a certain degree you can do that as long as you don't have an abundance of failures in that crop. If you have an abundance of failures in that crop, in actuality, you're actually better off just disking it all under and replanting. It's kind of like a retailer that sells stuff and realizes that they've invested in the wrong product, and now they've dropped the market to 50%. Now they've dropped the market to 0.75%. Well, in actuality, it's cheaper for the retailer to go ahead and take the loss and maybe donate that particular product, whatever it may be, to a non-profit than it is to box it up and bag it up and send it all the way back to the wherever it come from. That's going to cost that much more money in freight and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There comes a time that you can strain at a gnat just to swallow a camel, and that's exactly what I believe Donald Trump is doing whenever it comes to the tariffs. Now, there's no doubt nobody wants to see fraud. Nobody wants to see abuse pertaining to people abusing the system. And there's no doubt you could go to places like Memphis, Tennessee, or St. Louis, or other big metropolitan areas, and you could find where people have been raised up on Social Security and food stamps and welfare for the past 5 or 6, 7 generations. Those occurrences have been going on. Well, how do you stop that? Well, there's a right way and a wrong way of stopping that. And by cutting off people's heads and by dismembering the services completely, or annihilating them 2/3 of the way, to the degree that now the government is ineffective, and now you got sure enough gangbusters that's coming up, or carpetbaggers that's trying to survive, and the next thing you know, the crime is going to increase, the problems are going to increase. You're talking about tensions in young and old people's lives that are going to increase. It's probably going to result in social structure problems pertaining to separations and divorces and etc. You're going to have more businesses that's going to default and go under, and it's just an endless endless cycle of hardship of the way that this government, this administration right now is approaching this particular problem. It's awful. It's absolutely awful. Now, getting back to Jerusalem, pertaining to what was discussed about them. There's no doubt that Jerusalem has every right in the world to protect itself towards it not being somebody's floor mat or somebody's whipping post. And I think that's one of the problems that's been created for the past 30 plus years, is that the Christian society has been so lenient in wanting to compromise to the degree that now a lot of those countries and a lot of those people actually feels like that they're entitled to these entitlements or these pleasures. And the thing about it is, they wasn't entitled to nothing, because you know why? In actuality, you have to earn those things. And if you disqualify yourselves from earning those things, well, guess what? You no longer get those things. And the countries over there that's acting brutally as far as bombing them and killing the way that's going on over there, you can't really blame it on Israel, though sometimes it gives the appearances that Israel is going a bit further than what they ought to go with their strong arm techniques. But the fact of the matter is, if Israel does not stand up and protect their own sovereignty and protect their own dignity pertaining to their Christianity rights, then basically everybody and their brother is going to walk all over them. And that's exactly what the devil and the devil's peoples wants. The starvation over in the Middle East should be the failure of the Pakistani, I almost said government, but in actuality it's not a government. It's a terrorist group. It is not a government. Though I believe it should be a two-state government over there, but you don't have a two-state government with somebody that's doing what they're doing right now under the pretense of what Hamas is doing. Hamas is bringing the suffering and the grief and the destruction not only to his enemy pertaining to the people in Jerusalem, but he's bringing it to his own people. And until those people stand up in an uprising against Hamas, odds are you're going to see the endless pain and suffering unless some other group goes in there and puts an end to it. Like America has been known of doing in different countries, Libya and other places, or Germany or whatever, towards putting an end to it. Until the Christian society sticks close to their priorities pertaining to their obligations, we're only going to see the devil and the devil's people get away with that much more hypocrisy and that much more blaspheming against the Christian society. Now I've tried to put out messages by telling people to prepare, get ready. And seemingly it's as if I'm talking to a tree. As a matter of fact, sometimes I feel like that I would actually get more attention from a tree than I would to the vast majority of the people in the surrounding areas. This type of abuse, this type of neglect, this type of rejection has been going on in my life now for 30 plus years. So basically, I'm tarnished to it. I've been basically callous to it to the degree that I no longer let it suck me down or drag me down or pull me down. I don't no longer put myself in a state of depression by putting out the videos and not getting the near response that I feel like that it should get, because I've gotten adjusted to it. It's kind of like being abused. You know, whenever you go through life and the only thing you've ever known is abuse. You got abused physically, you got abused emotionally, you got abused verbally, you got abused financially, you got abused socially. Whenever a person goes through that, they become hardened to that, to the degree that really it don't affect them. Not in the aspect that it used to affect me. Now, at one time, it used to be horrifying. It was a travesty on every level. To think that people was looking at me and calling me a liar, or saying, no, Dennis, you're incorrect, or no, Dennis, you have the wrong motives in you doing what you're doing towards trying to tell people these things. And the whole time, I wasn't trying to bamboozle the people. The whole time, I wasn't lying to the people. The whole time, I could have cared less about a celebrity status. Why? Because I was doing it in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, in labor, in love of labor. That's why I was doing it. Just like the vast majority of your nonprofits, they're not doing what they're doing supposedly because they're looking to get some sort of big recognition name out of it or to get rich off of it. They're doing what they're doing because why? Because they had a passion to do it. That's why they are doing it. Well, obviously, my passion was never recognized in Northwest Tennessee. And as far as I'm concerned, out of the hundreds of video link videos that I put out, either on YouTube or social media, as far as I'm concerned, I'm still not being appreciated, and I'm still getting the cold shoulder. So, like I said, once you get adjusted or calloused to this type of treatment, you basically become adjusted to it. You know, it would actually surprise me. I would probably almost faint or fall out in the floor if somebody like let's say a political judge like Tommy Moore, or First Baptist minister from Martin, Tennessee, or some of these other big ministers that hold down these churches in some of these other big areas, I guess I would actually just fall and hit the floor if they was to come and knock on my door and me ask them, would you like a glass of tea, or would you like a Coke, or would you like some water before we sit down and start talking? And it would, sure enough, I'm sure it would bring me to tears if they actually talked to me like I was a real human being, much less a recognized Christian human being.
It's blatant. You know, when I first got involved with voting rights over a decade ago as a voting rights attorney, it was a lot more subtle back then. And they used to try and have some kind of rationale around what they were doing. This is the most brazen, I think spineless thing that I've ever seen in my career, where they're openly saying, we've been instructed to do this. We know that it's not the right thing to do. We know we should be focusing on something else, but we're going to do it anyway. And Texans have taken notice.
What does this mean? I mean, this is happening at the same time that the Supreme Court is, it looks like, about to take further action to further gut the Voting Rights Act. That's coming out of Louisiana. And then this fight in Texas, and we know what Republicans in other states are looking at what Texas does and planning to potentially copy it. What is going to happen to minority voting representation in this country? What's at stake here for Black Americans, Black voters who had to fight tooth and nail to be able to stand in a line to vote in the first place, and who are now watching all of this roll back in 2025?
As we approach the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, it's unbelievable to me that we are here. As I said, I was a voting rights lawyer. After my NFL career, I chose to do voting rights because I wanted to give everybody a voice, that everyone to play a role in our democracy, but also because of the history of what's happened in Texas and across the South, of making it harder for certain folks to vote. And where we are now is that the courts are no longer going to be our backstop. And one of the reasons why I ran for Congress and ended my civil rights practice was because I realized that we now had to write into law affirmatively these protections and no longer just rely on incredibly important historic legislation like the Voting Rights Act. That's why I was so frustrated, I think 3 years ago, when we had passed the Fourth People Act that banned gerrymandering like this out of the House of Representatives, but we couldn't get it through the filibuster in the Senate because a couple of folks decided that they thought that was something they didn't want to adjust. That was outrageous then, but we are seeing the consequences now. But I think we also have to pause and say, what are we going to do to come back from this? What are we going to do knowing that the Supreme Court is likely going to gut Section 2, as they've done to Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, taking away the shield, now they're going to take away the sword. What are we going to do? And to me, it has to be that we're going to commit that the next time we have the ability to, and that we're going to talk to you about this, that we're going to fundamentally change the fairness in this country around voting, that we're going to ban gerrymandering nationwide, that we're going to have national standards around voting so you don't have these huge disparities from state to state, like in my state here in Texas. We can do this legislatively, and we have to do it when we get the power.
Colin, Elise Jordan here. I want to tap your expertise as a voting rights lawyer just to talk through this because I am personally confused and you can explain it to me. So Texas Republicans can say that they want to redistrict for partisan aims and for their party, and that's completely legal according to the Supreme Court. But because of the Voting Rights Act, racial data has to be looked at to make sure that voters aren't disenfranchised. So when you're redrawing the map, it does have to be drawn into consideration in some way, shape, or form. So eventually, will there always be a court battle over this redistricting?
There will be a court battle, but let me explain this for folks at home. Listen, unfortunately, the Supreme Court has allowed what we call partisan gerrymandering. They seem to think that's okay. I think it's not. I think we should ban it legislatively, and as I said, we can do that. But for the moment, they've said that that's acceptable. But in Texas, what we're seeing is that this is not a partisan gerrymander. This is a racial gerrymander, and that still is impermissible. It's impermissible when you are reducing the overall voting power of minority communities, and that is what is being done here. That's what the court case that will follow this will seek to prove. And listen, the state legislator said originally when they were being challenged in court on the first gerrymander that came in this decade that they did not use race in consideration when they were drawing those lines because they knew they couldn't say that. Then the DOJ of the new presidency comes in. The DOJ sends a letter saying, actually, we think you did use race, and now that the state legislator has kind of reversed themselves and are saying, okay, actually, you're right, we should redraw it. And so they've lied in court as well. And I think that's something that folks should understand, is that this is so brazen that in any other context, in any other setting, this would just be thrown out. And we have these kind of kabuki theater hearings where they pretended like they're listening to people when they already had released the maps. And so what we have to do on the legal front is prove that when you're messing with districts like the 18th Congressional District here in Houston, that was originally Barbara Jordan's district, Nikki Leland's district, Sheila Jackson Lee's district, that when you're messing with these districts, that you're doing it, that's going to reduce the voting power of minority communities here in Texas. That's a racial discrimination, and that is why this map should be impermissible.
We have only a few seconds left before we have to go to break, but I have to ask you, do you not support someone like Gavin Newsom going and deciding to move ahead with a gerrymander of their own? Democrats who are saying right now, we've got to fight fire with fire. We understand it might be hypocritical, but we have to do it, they say, to save democracy. What do you think?
I think we have to fight fire with fire. I'm a voting rights lawyer who wants to ban gerrymandering across this country, and as soon as I get a chance, I will. But we have to make sure that we have the ability to prevent things like this from happening, but also to respond to it. But right now, my focus, of course, is still on these state legislators, and I want to close with this. Everyone should support them who's watching this in any way you can. You can find their information online about how you can support them. They need our support right now. This is something that has huge risks for them and huge costs for them, and we need to support them as they're standing up for voting rights in Texas, but also around the country.
Former Congressman Colin Allred, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah. Thanks.
Up next, the Trump administration struggles to defend his firing of the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics after a bad jobs report. This is the Weekend Primetime.
And we can look forward to more decreasing in jobs because of what's going on with the tariffs. But when it comes to gerrymandering, is it not the same thing whenever you're lying to the public and you're telling them, you're trying to influence the public in a negative way, and there's nothing to back up the basis of what you're telling them? A matter of fact, the proof is actually in the opposite direction for what you're telling them. And I'm going to use the catastrophes pertaining to the disasters whenever it comes to environmental global warming. I'm going to use that for a mere illustration that you'd almost have to be, to me, in my eyes, I'm not calling nobody a fool, because I know what the Bible says about accusing people of being fools, but you would almost have to be a fool to not see how that these catastrophes and these disasters are being just like the Bible teaches, or just as Jesus Christ taught, that they would come even as a woman travailing with a child, that the closer that that woman gets towards having that baby, while she's, fixing to deliver, the pains will come even twice as hard and twice as close together, and it just be coming closer and closer and closer to the point that she practically, the way I understand it, almost feels like she's fixing to die. That's the reason why so many women don't want to have natural birth, because if they do, it may put their bodies in shock because they can't stand the pressure and the pain. The bottom line is this: this movement of tariffs sounds good on paper to some degree, but in actuality, when it comes to the reality of what you're doing, basically you're pissing off a bunch of people. And yes, I realize that there was a lot of those countries that was taking advantage of the American people, and we should stop that. But once more, there's a proper way of doing that, and you can't just throw it out there, throw basically the baby out with the water, in cutting off everybody this way, because a lot of those countries we solely depend upon, and a lot of those countries, it's not their fault that the American people over here wasn't keeping an eye on their checks and balances. Now, I think it was maybe Clinton or Bush, one or the other, that come up with this theory about fuzzy math. Well, there is no such thing as fuzzy math. Either it adds up or it doesn't add up, is the way that I was taught in the Department of Arithmetic. 2 plus 2 equals 4. 4 plus 4 equals 8. It don't equal 9. It don't equal 7. 4 plus 4 equals 8. And it's got to line up. And if it's not lining up, then you realign it for it to line up. That's how I've been taught to do things. And naturally, you do have to have more money coming in than you got going out. But I guarantee you, the things that the governor just got through talking about, pertaining to the labor issues, pertaining to the state, pertaining to cutting off all these services, and etc., there's going to be a horrible effect on down the road that I think is, if it doesn't hit this winter full face, it will hit next year or before the next winter full face, before the next presidential election full face, because we're heading down a cycle of things right now that the unforeseeables can't even be foreseen by the professional people that's out there that does the numbers game, much less people like me that aren't acquainted with this type of commercialized marketing industry. It's sad. It's sad to see how that the rich man has messed up, the smart man has messed up, businessman has messed up in kicking the can down the road, and now all of a sudden we want to stop the can from being kicked down the road, which that's a good thing. It never should have got kicked down the road as far as it did to begin with, as far as I'm concerned. We should have been looking at this from a different angle, even during Desert Storm and Desert Shield that we spent so much money on, not counting the type of money that we spent in the Afghanistan war, not counting all the other factors that's basically taking us down this road of doom and gloom. There's got to be practical people with logical solutions to this problem without basically throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And that's basically the attempts at what's happening right now with this administration. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Elon Musk actually seen that spoke up against this type of retaliation, because basically you're casting a stumbling block upon to the people that had already become their lifestyle had already become asphyxiated with these types of services, and now all of a sudden you're going to jerk the biscuit out of their mouths and say, nope, we're not going to do that no more. Nope, you don't get this no more. Nope, that department is shut down. You can't go about doing this way. Wow, talk about injustice. You can't get no worser injustice than to basically go from bad to worse, kind of like going from the pot to the fire.
And I really do worry that, we've really lost a lot of faith and trust, not just at BLS, but across the government. Look at the ways in which so many of our agencies and so much data has become politicized.
What did we learn about the health of our economy, the labor market, in these numbers, which maybe are the last numbers, to Molly's point, that we'll be able to trust out of this office? The one area of growth, healthcare. And I'm curious, though, when we see these losses, what impact are things like the mass deportation campaign, rapid changes in the tech sector, and AI? What are you learning about what's happening to the American economy through this?
Such a good question, Antonia. Maybe we'll start with sort of big picture. What have we learned? So big picture, what I think these jobs numbers tell us is that the tariffs are really starting to bite in the economy. And until these numbers actually, I think there was a little bit of a puzzle, because growth had slowed in the first 6 months of the year, but we weren't seeing a commensurate slowdown in the labor market. Now we know that, in fact, there has been a slowdown in the labor market, and it's exactly what you would expect. My colleagues and I at the Budget Lab at Yale have been estimating what are the likely impacts of these tariffs on the broader economy. And what we've concluded is that you're going to see higher prices for consumers, but that ricochets into the rest of the economy. You're also going to see a smaller economy. You're going to see fewer jobs, and that's exactly what's showing up in the data. Importantly, there's some sectors, and healthcare is one of them, and education is one of them too a bit, where you are actually seeing jobs growth over the course of the last few months. And it's kind of key. Those are not tariff-related sectors, right? So what I think we're learning about the economy is that in the parts of the economy where the tariffs are incredibly important, you are seeing that economic shrinkage that you would anticipate from these types of policies. And sort of my message to the administration is, if you're frustrated with this jobs data, I think there is a very clear thing you do, which is you pull back from the trade policies that are leading you to weakening the economy. This is not a sort of recession that's dropped out of the sky. This is a man-made economic crisis, and it's one that luckily we can take steps to address.
Really quickly, I want to ask you about the insider trading bill that has Donald Trump very upset. The bill would ban congressional members, vice president, president from stock trading. And it's, in my opinion, so basic and common sense and way overdue, but Donald Trump threw such a fit over it that the vice president and president are exempted now.
So I find it so interesting to sort of think through all of this in the context of everything that's happening in the economy at the moment, because I really think what we have the capacity to do with legislation like this is to try to bring some trust into the system. Not that there is a lot of insider trading that members of Congress are doing, but even if there's the appearance that as a result of having access to certain types of information or having oversight over aspects of the economy, you're sort of taking advantage of that position or that perch, I think that runs real risks. And so I was very heartened to see this legislation in whatever form it manages to take as an important first step, at least in building trust in some aspects of the way that the government functions.
And it's wildly popular. I mean, this bill it's one of the very few things that Americans agree on, is they don't want their members of Congress making money off legislation.
And there's a very easy place for them to put their money. They should put it in index funds. That's what I teach my students. So.
Right. Natasha, thank you so much. Up next, Donald Trump sets his sight on the Breakfast Club host Truman, the god, after he floated that he thinks he would make a strong Democratic ticket. We'll tell you.
What I think needs to be adjusted to do this in a legal perspective way, the right way, is basically to fumigate a third party, a neutral party, that even, I don't forget his name now, Monroe or something like that. He was a rich guy. He had the philosophy of doing that, and he come very close in his run of doing that, of a third party, but he didn't never succeed because there was too many old ideals with old investments, with old families that was used to running a show, and now all of a sudden you're gonna change, you're gonna do things differently. Well, that's called maturity. That's called stepping it up to the next level. Something that our people over here obviously aren't willing to do as far as grow and excel and evolve. The whole purpose for knowledge, becoming knowledge, is so that we can stop making the mistakes that we've made in the past and make things more profitable in the future. That's the reason why it says in the Bible that God has not found our works perfect yet, to go back and do thy first works over again, or else he will throw us off into tribulation. Those are the pathways that the trajectory that we're on right now, that I don't think can be denied in any form or fashion. We just need to have somebody that's smart enough and powerful enough to get up there and do the proper and right things whenever it comes to readjusting what needs to be readjusted in the right way. Because this tight line walk, this balanced walk right now that this government's playing off of, it ain't working. And for Donald Trump to go around wanting to fire a bunch of people over his own doings speaks volumes about what type of character that he is, because he's not willing to own up to his own mistakes. Never has, and probably never will. But the American people keep buying in to his baloney. Unbelievable in what's happening right in front of our very eyes. But you know what? You can't really blame it all on one party, because I think both parties are just as guilty, the Democrats and the Republicans. And that's the reason why I think that somebody really needs to focus in, hammer in very hard. Perot was the guy that I was thinking about a while ago. They need to hammer in very, very hard in bringing in a third party pertaining to changing the trajectory that we're on, because the trajectory that we're on is only going to add insult to injury. And if you don't believe me, you hang around, because it's going to be coming near a neighborhood near you. And if it don't come in one form, I promise it will come into another. And if it's not, your bridge is not being repaired, if it's not your roads being repaired, it's going to make crime go up. It's going to make businesses shut down. It's going to cause all other kind of problems, just like the governor of the state of Kentucky talked about. Now, if people can't see that and understand that, it's simply because they choose not to. Good luck to all of us. God bless America. God bless our troops. Just want to say good luck to all of us. Heaven help us all. Please remember all those who are struggling in the world today. Please remember what's going on with the Ukrainians. Please remember, of course, what's going on right now with the Middle East. Please remember what's going on in other countries pertaining to the chaos that, to me, is only brewing or getting worse. And that is a clear, mere sign that we are definitely heading off into the abyss. And once we go over the Rubicon, regardless whether it's the environmental Rubicon or the political Rubicon, once you go over that Rubicon, then it's basically almost impossible to put the toothpaste back into the toothpaste tube. That it becomes a point of, well, Do I only disc different parts of the crop that didn't come up, or would I just be better off just to disc it all under? Would I be better off to take all this merchandise that we ordered that we obviously don't nobody want, and package it up, box it up, and send it back to China, or send it back to Singapore, or send it back wherever it come from? Or would we be better off just to donate it to a charity somewhere? Straining at a gnat will swallow a camel. You can't sweat the small stuff. You're not running a business whenever you're running a government. There's so many ins and outs. There's so many things that you just don't do that this administration is doing right now. Heaven help us all, is all I can say. Heaven help us all, because I've been saying this now for, I guess, ever since Donald Trump has been elected this last time, that the things that they're doing in one way looks good. It's kind of like, I think I used the analogy of a boat that's sinking. It's got 100 holes in it, and you're trying to repair the holes. Well, you can't repair the 100 holes by taking a sledgehammer to it and creating 6 or 7 big holes, because the 6 or 7 big holes now are going to exceed the volume of water that's coming into the boat of the 100 little holes. You're adding insult to misery. You don't have to be a brain surgeon to see these things. Good luck to all of us. God bless America. God bless our troops. And heaven help us all. Shalom.
And you saw that with people who couldn't stand Trump, but they just couldn't pull the lever for Hillary or Kamala. I have no problem bearing witness to two white dudes duking it out. That is not what the future of this country looks like. It's not what the world needs. We can do so much better.
But does the National Democratic Party just weigh down local and state candidates with so much baggage that it makes it impossible for them to break out of the intense partisanship of this era? Like, you look at Nebraska and you look at Dan Osborne and how he really had a strong chance against Deb Fischer running as an independent. He went totally outside of the Democratic Party apparatus, and he didn't even want the label. And now he's trying to do it another time, but it might not work, because the second time it's a little bit harder when you are fundraising off of Act Blue, the Democratic fundraising apparatus.
There is